Good morning, everybody. Welcome to How Gender Fluidity Recast Brand Engagement. We're so thrilled to have you here today. I have some fantastic panelists for you. Just to introduce myself, my name is Angela Yang. I am the Director of Connections, which is the social and media practice at T3, an independent agency here in Austin. I identify as a cisgender female, and my pronouns are she and her. And just to start today, before we get to business and the best part of everything, I wanted to make sure that I caveat that today's discussion is really 50 minutes. We want to keep 10 minutes for you so you can ask the questions that you'd like, but we're not going to be able to cover everything, right? So you came here today specifically with a focus on marketing and advertising, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Any questions that you have around identifiers, around definitions, please come up to us after for that. We'd love to answer them for you. And another thing too is we are very proud folks speaking up here today, but just to remind everybody that we don't speak for everyone. We speak from our experience. So we have some fantastic people on this panel today that have so much to share with you, but we wanted to caveat that as well. So with that said, I'd love to kick off and introduce our panelists today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shane Whalley. My pronouns are Z, here, heres. I identify as genderqueer, somebody who doesn't identify strongly as male or female. I live my life in the delicious non-binary space, and I'm so happy to be here this morning.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Andy Bossley. I am a gay cisgender man. My pronouns are he, him, his. I lead the performance marketing function for one of the business units at IBM. Performance marketing, for those of you, I think it's an IBM term, but think events, content, social, digital, everything outside of the product marketing realm of things. I was lucky enough this year as well to be inducted to the Forbes 30 Under 30 for marketing and advertisement. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's the perspective that I'll be bringing to the panel.
Cool. My name's Chelsea Hostetter. I identify as a queer cisgender female. My pronouns are she, her. So I'm a senior UX designer at Goodpatch in Tokyo, Japan. I speak both English and Japanese, so if you have any questions in Japanese, feel free to hit me. So I've been working in interaction design and design research for about 4-5-ish years. And then I was previously working here in Austin at Frog Design. We had lots of awesome clients. I've traveled all over the world giving talks around design and ethics.
Can I just add one thing? So I'm not a marketer or a brander. I'm here as an example of who you want to market and brand to. And I run a training and consulting group called Daring Dialogues Consulting, doing work around LGBTQ, trans, social justice, education, advocacy.
So the panelists here today actually were hand-chosen and picked because they represent such a great spectrum of individuals and also points of view as it relates to actually marketing and also the community itself. So with that said, I actually do want to start actually with you, Shane, Mixer Whalley, if I will. The way that we had started to talk about this panel, we actually had a lot of discussions internally around what we wanted to call it, what we wanted to talk about, and how language would play such a key part of it too. So it was spirited discussion as to what was politically correct and what was not. And so that was really eye-opening for a lot of us on the actual panel. So I wanted to open and get your thoughts in terms of how brands and marketers today should be thinking about language and how that really impacts the way that they welcome gender non-binary individuals into the conversation.
The simple question first, right? I think we just have to acknowledge that language is ever evolving. I'm somebody who's been out in the gender non-binary community for a little over 20 years, and the word genderqueer didn't exist. I talked about living in the gender gray. We talked about gender variant, then we talked about gender non-conforming, and now we talk about gender non-binary. Don't get stuck with the language. Keep up as best you can. BuzzFeed, HuffPost, Tumblr, all are where I stay current. And I think the other really important piece is if you make a mistake, which we all do, just to stay in those conversations and listen to the community if they're pushing back and modify and adjust as you need to.
So to push on that a little bit further, when you see brands and marketers extend themselves beyond the typical he, she, him, her, how does that make you think about the brand and what it's doing for inclusivity?
I rarely see or hear myself in the media. And if I do, I might jump up off my recliner, throw my cat into the air, and gently, and do a happy dance, right? So Coca-Cola during the Super Bowl ad used they, their, them pronouns. And I was like, what? Like rewind, wish I could, right? One Day at a Time, the new Latinx One Day at a Time also has an episode where they talk about pronouns. So it's beginning, and again, I feel like the world is catching up to me. I didn't make 13 under 30, right? I'm trying to get 60 under 60. So, but you know, I notice when it's omitted, and I certainly notice when it's there.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think along with this discussion around labels and names and identity, Chelsea, I know that you've worked really closely with the community and the work that you've done for Query, the app that you created and designed specifically for transgender individuals that are really interested in really connecting with each other. So taking that level of consideration into identity, into labels, and into the actual user experience, what did you learn from that project, and what are some things that you would like to share in terms of the more informative insights that you gained?
Yeah, so to give everyone sort of a background, about maybe 4 years ago, I did a 10-month research study with the gender non-binary communities in Austin around safety and talking to people about what made them feel safe, what made them feel unsafe, how they got to a level of safety where they felt comfortable in their own skin. Part of it was because I was reading some statistics on transgender and gender non-binary folks, and we're talking like 57% of people, based on like a 2014 study, that 57% of people said that their family chose not to speak with them or spend time with them at all once they came out. And it's a huge loss of community, and it's a huge loss of support. And when you're in the gender non-binary community, the coming out doesn't stop with just one sort of like round of people. It's a constant coming out of saying, hey, work, you know, I'm transitioning, or hey, work, I'm gender fluid, or hey, partner, like, or hey, family. And so these moments happen almost every day, almost every moment. And for me, in doing the study, that the big thing is, I think, representation, right? I think if there was one thing that I would like to see more in marketing and also design is just images and pictures of happy queers, because there's not a lot of our stories being told in a happy way. A lot of them are being told in a very sad and, how do you say it? Like, just like the overall message is like, okay, well, if you're queer, then feel free to like pay the price for, you know, what that entails. And two is about mentorship. So a lot of people who are coming out in the gender non-binary spectrum are asking questions like, you know, all right, so how do I start binding, or how do I start wearing makeup? Or, you know, these are some like tactical questions, but there's also like, how do I grow older? How do I see myself in 40 or 50 years? And they need that sort of mentorship that comes from not only their peers, but people who are older than them as well, and people who are across a large parity of socioeconomic, you know, racially diverse community. It's not just seeing people who are just like you, it needs to be seeing people who are across the spectrum and saying like, yes, I survived, and you will too.
So knowing that you started to get a better insight into the community and understanding how people felt and how they felt like they were being portrayed in the media or advertising, how did you take that into your actual design practice?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, in terms of, user experience design, we work together a lot with marketing, especially when it comes to like designing form fields and that sort of thing. And so the first thing that I usually ask marketers, and it probably puts me at the top of their shit list, is like, why do you need this information?
Yes.
Yep.
Hear, hear.
Shit list.
Yeah, because, I'm immediately on your shit list, Andy. But because the reality is that if you're talking to people and you're saying like, okay, the way that we're going to segment them or the way that we're going to talk to them is by targeting them through either male or female, my usual response to that is, well, wait a second. I mean, there's more than just two, one. And the other is that like if we're targeting people based on what we perceive is gender or what we perceive like the stereotypes around gender are, then we aren't actually really targeting people. We're targeting an average person that we believe is a stereotype. Mm-hmm. So I believe that especially in the design of our application, we weren't asking people's genders. We weren't even really asking how people identified. We asked them about their preferences and things that they wanted to talk about and things that they wanted to receive mentorship on. Not, do you want to be mentored by someone who is also a woman? I mean, that wasn't something that we considered, or that wasn't something that we felt was as important as receiving mentorship from somebody who knew something about that topic.
Gotcha. So speaking of shit lists, not to put South by on blast, but we did surface this great screenshot of the actual app experience. So just kind of tagging off of what we had talked about, Shane, I'd love to hear about your thoughts about this other sort of trend that you're seeing.
Yeah, and when she says other trend, not like the other trend, like the other trend, right? This is what other looks like. This is one of the things that other looks like, and it is not my favorite experience to, when I see pull downs like this, I actually try to see if I can escape it and not answer. Sometimes I'll also see ones that say male, female, not, and then the third option is not specified. I'm like, what does that mean? Right? Can't tell, right? Like they're all unsure, right? Like there are a lot of things that happen. So yeah, that othering experience is really difficult, and I'm just going to tell a quick story since we've now thrown South by under the bus. I'll now throw Groupon under the bus. When I first signed up for Groupon, if I'm only given two options, I'll put what's on my birth certificate, right? So I picked female. And then Groupon was wasting a lot of money on me because the things that they were offering for me were not things that I buy for myself. My girlfriend might have enjoyed it, right? So I went back in and changed my gender to male and was like better, except I don't play golf. But shoes and some other things were kind of, but then I was still missing some of the things that I like spas and right. So making assumptions about what people like based on their gender really narrows the scope. And othering people like me. Before marriage equality, then on my relationship status, I also was other. Like by the time I finished a thing, my middle name was Shane, other Whalley, and that just is it's irritating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to that point, like, had Groupon asked you, do you like spas, yes or no, right? I mean, there's a lot of different ways they could have approached that, and they chose to approach it in a very gendered way.
Right, well, and is the spa a super gendered spa? Like, am I gonna feel comfortable being in that spa, right? Because I think the other thing I was gonna say about, like the coming out, I come out every time I use a restroom if I'm in a public space, right? So, yeah, the coming out just happens when I walk through a room. Hello. Other,
So I do want to take a step back. I know that we launched directly into the talking about language and identity and understanding terms and pronouns and giving the people agency to be able to choose how they self-describe. But taking a step back, why are we even talking about this today? Why is this valuable for brands and marketers to understand, to know, to learn, to change? I'd love to toss that one over to Andy.
Yeah. So I think there are a few reasons or dimensions that I look at it personally. The first for me is, what's the responsibility that we have as marketers, as advertisers, with the images that we use, the messages that we put out there, the content that we're creating from a personal perspective? I mean, honestly, it shapes the view that you have of the world, the images that you're seeing. If I had been a kid and seen Moschino Barbie have a little boy playing with it in an ad when I was younger, I would have immediately felt like I had more of a place in the world, more of a place in media, more representation. So I think we just have to, when you think of the importance of this topic and inclusivity in marketing and advertising, a big piece of that is, how do you make people feel more included? How do you help people understand that they have a place in this world with all the messages we're putting out there? The second thing for me that I think is really important is, from a statistical standpoint, 50% of millennials feel that gender is on a spectrum, and 56% of Gen Zers know someone who uses gender neutral pronouns. So we are at this moment in marketing and advertising at a point where the market is shifting. And as advertisers, as marketers, if we are not able to connect with people, because something as fundamental as gender identity is evolving, is constantly evolving, we as marketers and advertisers, we have to have the ability to emote and speak to a broader audience. And then the final thing, from a dollars and cents standpoint, I think this is really important. I know most of you have leadership that you would have to talk to and sell this to internally from a business perspective. Think about a 5% increase in customer retention can lead to 95% more profits. So if you are able to speak to an audience with the terms that they use, the terms that they care about, in an inclusive way, you're gonna facilitate a brand that's built on trust and respect. And brands that are built on trust and respect win. So I think, for me, those are kind of the three main things on why this is so important.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think, too, a bigger question that I think a lot of people have in this room, too, is how you, coming from IBM, it's a huge organization, right?
Yeah.
And you're one of many decision makers. I mean, Forbes 30 under 30. That's great. But something that I did want to pick on is, how do you make change happen at that level?
Yeah.
Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, like you in this room, I will leave here and have actions that I need to take, conversations that I need to start. I can tell you personally, I have already reached out to our chief marketing officer at IBM, our chief diversity officer, and I'm trying to start the conversation internally. IBM is a pretty great place, I feel like, when it comes to inclusivity. So we already have some of the organizational structure in place around forums for us to talk, to be open. We can have avatars that show who we are, from gender identity to sexual orientation. So that immediately kind of breaks down some of the barriers that you would have in coming out at the workplace, because it's on my photo that everybody sees when we're instant messaging or emailing back and forth. So I think that's really helpful. But yeah, the conversations with your team first and kind of building the conversation in to out, I think is the right way to start. I also think, from a marketing and advertising perspective, and I'll get into this a little bit later, I think, with some of the questions that we have, but it is the onus of this effort is going to fall on the brands and the advertisers to push our media partners in the direction that we want them to go. Because still today, when you go in and you try to segment on a paid social campaign on Facebook, you may not be able to select the gender identity that you want to include within your marketing efforts. So we will have to work with our partners at Facebook, at Google, to say, if we are going to effectively message our brand to the audience that we want to in the way that we want to, then we need you to evolve the way, as a media partner, that you think about your platform. And so I think that's kind of where my head is at.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
I would say the other thing about the inside out piece is, let's say you do a great campaign and I feel seen. I am going to go to your company's website, I'm going to look up your non-discrimination policy, and I'm going to see if it's inclusive. So you also, if you try to sell me something and you're not doing the right thing inside your company, I'm still not going to buy your product.
Yeah.
And
So the inside out piece is really important.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect example of why in the conversations internally at IBM, I'm going down the chief diversity officer route, because they are responsible for some of these organizational things from an HR perspective, recruiting practices, how you can self-identify on HR forms, and then also the marketing route, because I don't want it to be lip service. I don't want to seem in touch as a brand. I think when you do that, you run the risk of having a big brand miss.
Yes.
We've seen those in the last few years with some commercials from a beverage company. So yeah, you just have to be careful, I think, and cognizant of that when you're doing your marketing.
And I think on the design side of things, it's really important to get close to your marketers, right? Like, I probably, even in Tokyo, I probably have maybe meetings twice a week or so with our marketing folks to try to understand where they're coming from and how we can sort of put design and marketing at the same sort of like level. And as far as like, if you were doing design in your organizations, there's sort of like 3 shout outs that I'd want to make. One is the IDEA's Human-Centered Design Toolkit. If y'all haven't already picked that up, it's like a free PDF. And that's something to just sort of get people thinking around the idea of like designing for humans. But 2, Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. That's another free like PDF. And it contains exercises for designers to try to think out of how they would design for themselves, because a lot of people who are in design will say like, well, I'll design for users, but these users are going to look a lot like me, and so the inclusive design, it focuses primarily on differently abled bodies, but like it walks through you and the team in exercises of saying like, how do we think outside of like, how do we think outside of abled bodies? And even, I would say, just pulling that out, how do we think outside of our own gendered bodies if we are like cisgendered? And then last, as a shout out to the Pronoun Project website, they have a currently up-to-date code snippet for a drop-down box for all of the known sort of like gender identifiers. And so if your developer is like, it's too hard to think about all these genders, just like slap and paste this code snippet in their IM, because yeah, it really is. And I think the big reason why people don't use like all the gender identifiers on the website is primarily because people don't want to take the time to look up all of these different gender identifiers. And I mean, I think that's lazy, first and foremost. But second, I understand why there are some people who don't have that level of like care, and I'm glad that we have a code snippet out there to say like, just like least amount of effort possible.
Thank you for the shout out for the pronounproject.com. Appreciate it. One thing that I also wanted to touch on, and this is even bigger in terms of a question, a more macro level, is everyone in this room, at some point, we all feel like we can talk about this openly, right? So there's a level of safety here, regardless of who's in here for whatever reason. Maybe you're curious, maybe you identify as part of the transgender community, maybe not. But how do you feel like the political climate right now is really impacting the way advertisers, marketers feel comfortable in being able to be more inclusive?
I can't answer from that standpoint, right? Because again, you're marketing to me, and I can tell you that this moment in time is terrifying, right? Like, so much progress was made in the previous administration is being undone on a daily basis. And so I think people being out and open. So I think maybe the flip side of that is if media was showing, again, that kind of positive image and taking the risk. So this is my deal, right? This is kind of probably my bottom line. I want marketers and branders to take the risk so I don't have to.
Yeah.
Like if I'm out being the face of the thing, then my body is at risk,
Yeah.
right? If marketing and branders take the risk, I realize there's a financial risk, but your bodies aren't at risk. And trans and non-gender binary people's bodies are at risk. And so if we can up the ante of visibility, it would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think from more of the marketing and advertising side, think about what's to be gained versus what's at stake for your brand. When you're building a brand, you want to think about how is this brand going to have a life that can go generations? How do you build a brand like Coca-Cola that has a very clear brand built around optimism? And I think if you build your brand around these universal lifestyle traits like being optimistic or being adventurous, you are able to take maybe what is seemed as a riskier stance and including a different audience than what traditionally you have. But in Coke's example with this Super Bowl ad, I mean, they flat out at the Super Bowl said, here are the pronouns at the beginning of the TV spot, and then the rest of the ad didn't use another pronoun throughout the entire advertisement, showed different races, different sexual orientations, people on a spectrum of gender identity. And guess what? It all laddered into their existing brand platform that they've had for over 130 years. So it made sense. It didn't feel like an outlier for them, but it may seem risky. It may also be something that helps the community feel more included. And I think at this time, from a political standpoint, that feeling of inclusion goes so far, and you will win customers because of that. And you'll win lifetime customers and people that value your brand so much more than if you hadn't taken that step forward.
Yeah, I've been drinking more Coke.
Yeah. You have. I
have.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, Andy, that there's a sense of, especially in the design world, there's a sense of like classic design or design that doesn't change over the ages, right? But I also think that our responsibility as, I'm speaking as myself, and then if there's other designers in the room, our responsibility as designers is to really hold people accountable to the principles that they've set at the get-go for both their brand and also their design. And so if their brand or their design says, we want to be adventurous, then you have to be that person to say, hey, remember when we said adventurous? And remember you saying, oh, these people are just edge cases. Like, let's not consider them. Like, it's okay. You really have to, as a designer and as a marketer, make that case and, hold people to it, because I think it's easy to talk the talk, but it's really hard to walk the walk.
So we talked a little bit about fear, but if I wanted to make this a little bit more positive, what would you like to see? I mean, you had talked about just happier portrayals of genderqueer individuals in media and marketing. I mean, what does your ideal state look like for anybody?
Ooh, well, I mean, for me, I think I mentioned happy queers, and then also gender non-binary folks mentoring other gender non-binary folks. So one of the most tearful conversations I ever had with a friend of mine who was, she identifies as trans, and she was like, my dream in life is to be a trans granny, and I'm going to go and give butterscotch candies to all my little queer friends, right? And I laughed, but then I started crying because the reality is that the dream to grow up sometimes is very hard for us to imagine. It's hard for us to imagine what our future looks like beyond our youth. And so to me, it was just such a super powerful moment, and I would love to see like older people in the gender non-binary and trans spectrum having fun, doing things, mentoring other people, that's that. And then, I mean, as far as design is concerned, really understanding, as far as the South by Southwest app, again, to put it on blast, why are we asking these male-female markers, and to really just start talking to
depending on the intent of your audience. And guess what? Gender doesn't come into that at all. It doesn't matter. In fact, it probably would be a distraction to the marketing message that you're trying to deliver at that point in time to that specific audience. So I think we're just at this moment where we now have the ability from a technology standpoint to deliver messages on that more one-to-one relationship that you don't even have to rely on things like gender to be able to do that.
So one thing is, I think for me, being on this stage is a moment of hope. Like in my wildest dreams when I came out 20 years ago, to think that, I'm gonna cry, right? To think that I get to sit up here and have this conversation is like a miracle. A couple of other things. I think the statistics around gender non-binary people as this kind of beautiful up-and-coming younger generation is beautiful, and to know that elders do exist, grandpas do exist. Now I'm going to go buy some butterscotch candies. So that's one. I think in Shane's world, which we do not live in, I'm working hard on it, but we're not there yet. I hate pull-down boxes, and I hate having to click a box for anything. And I really wish that we would say gender and a box, and I get to type it in. And race and ethnicity and a box, and I get to type it in. And age and a box, age maybe pull down, but I think we're stuffing what I'm finding, especially from younger folks when I'm out doing conversations, is the generations that are coming up hate labels, and they love language that expresses their experience. Mm-hmm. The world we live in still wants to stuff people in labels. And so if we can tolerate, which we haven't yet quite been able to do, if we can tolerate giving people space to self-identify with the language which resonates with them, and then have fancy software that somebody else has the brain to design that sorts in larger buckets, that for me is inclusive. Mm-hmm. I never feel included if I never see my language. But if I can tell you how I identify, kind of that is glorious. And, I work on a university campus as well. I teach at the School of Social Work here at UT Austin. And my researchers are always like, we can't do that. It's not statistically blah, 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 blah. So I'm like, can you give me the box that I need to check, and then also allow me to put in my language that feels inclusive? I'll take a double long survey if I get to do both. But so in my future, we give people space to self-identify. And the other thing I just want to really say is we haven't really talked about the intersections of race and ethnicity in this conversation. African American trans women are at the greatest risk of murder of any population in the United States. And so, the safety and the importance of this conversation gets amplified when we add additional identities on top of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Completely agree. And actually, I wanted to add, Shane, to your point about statistical, people pushing back to you on
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yes. I guess statistical significance is that we're seeing a resurgence, or I'm seeing a resurgence in design, or maybe a surgence. I'm not sure if there was a of data-driven design, data analytics, this sort of thing. And I do think that data is fantastic, and it allows you to do some pretty amazing things, but it's always important to remember that data ultimately comes from human beings, primarily. And human beings don't fit nicely into boxes, and human beings are kind of messy, and human beings are a little strange. And so to say that we could predict a population based on this beautiful, clean spreadsheet that we're going to force people to say, like, all right, I identify as like this, this, and this, and it's going to be this and this, we're actually taking away the messiness that is humanity. And I think that for me, I would like to see more of that messiness and ambiguity brought back into data.
We talked a lot about moments, and Andy, you had mentioned a moment in technology for us to be able to really think about inclusivity in a different way as it relates to gender, non-binary individuals. And then I know that Shane, you've also talked about moments in time as well, about being an elder, about there being, a group of newcomers or youngsters coming up as well. But I'd like to ask, what do you think it is about now, about today, that is enabling us to have conversations like this more than ever?
Okay, I'll take it. For me, my perspective, so I'm going to give a personal anecdote around this. I am 10 years older than my sibling, and there is such a difference in the way that my sister views the world than I do, and it challenges me every day as a person. It challenges me as an older sibling. It challenges me as a marketing and advertiser to think of what the next generation and how they view the world and their viewpoint and the way that they expect businesses to interact with them from a lifestyle perspective, and really speak to them in a way that honestly we've never done before in our industry. And so for me, I don't know exactly where that's coming from. I mean, I'm not a social anthropologist, but I do think that it is so apparent that the next generation, if we as marketing and advertisers are going to speak to them, we will have to change the status quo.
I mean, to be honest, and again, there are a lot of elders who have made room for this moment. I think the visions of trans folks that are super visible are young. And I've been going to trans conferences and having these conversations since the late 1990s. And I did it because there was a mirror for me. I went to a talk and I saw a reflection of possibility. And I think that there are a group of us who have lived our lives openly and authentically, so other people have mirrors. And then you have people like Janet Mock and Laverne Cox and Chaz Bono, and Caitlyn Jenner. Don't always like her politics, but she's vocal, and has money to do all the things, right, which also isn't possible for everyone. But I think it's taken a lot of people to be out and visible and vocal for this moment in time to happen. And I'm really excited that we can pass the ball off to people who are going to make the gender revolution so live. I think it also is that the media is finally getting a little more savvy, and a lot of people have done work with the media to help them. And I'm just going to do a shout out. There's an organization, I'm going to spell it, it's GLAAD.org, and they're the trans kind of LGBT media helpers. So if you're looking for language and how to do it right, GLAAD.org is a great organization for that. But yeah, I think we're at a moment of time of explosion, and as long as everybody can survive it, like, the revolution is here.
Tweet that one. Okay. Before we actually start to take questions, one last question for you, for anyone here or for anyone that are parts of communities that don't really understand, don't want to understand, don't think it's important or valuable. What's one thing that you would say to them?
I exist, and I'm lovely, and I will not frighten your children.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing for me is if your brand doesn't adapt to this moment, you won't have a brand.
Yeah, I think we talked about this like pre-panel about like what I would say, and I think I'm going to go with the saucy Chelsea answer rather than the generous Chelsea answer, which is that like the reason why you don't care is because brands are marketing towards you. And if they decide one day to stop marketing towards you, you're going to have the exact same opinion as we do.
So before I get to questions, I just want to thank the panelists again. If we could give them a round of applause for sharing their personal stories. We would love to be able to take a couple of questions from the audience as well. So please go ahead and step up to the mic, and we're happy to help.
Hey guys, thanks for a great panel. I really enjoyed it. My name is Alistair. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I'm a brand and marketing strategist. I have a question about, I guess, whitewashing and generally bringing our community into the middle class through advertising. So I work for a lot of quite conservative brands, a lot of banks and insurance companies and stuff, and like a lot of those kinds of companies, they really got on board the bandwagon, I suppose, in the last few years. And I've been creating ads for them to help bring them into the broader sort of progressive project. And then they get executed and then they get launched. And I also have a sister who is 10 years younger than me, and I showed her one of these ads, and she was like, that's really, really fucking boring. And she's right, like, you know, there's something very magical and unique about us, and I sort of feel like when I execute these campaigns, they turn into, like, we've just applied the sort of middle class aesthetic to us. And I guess I'm a bit torn about whether brands getting on board with this, you know, broad progressive project is actually doing good or more damage. And because, you know, there's a lot of the community that we're not representing. And I guess, you know, this is a big question for you in particular, Andy, but how do we keep pushing these brands to, you know, get on board with an activist mindset and keep pushing themselves to bring more people in?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, so let's be real. I work at IBM. We sell IT products, so it's not necessarily the sexiest activist brand necessarily, but let me tell you how I would approach this situation, and this is going to be a duh statement. Test, 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 everything that you can. I think you can prove anybody wrong with data, that it resonates more, the engagement's higher, the impressions go up, that the feeling about your brand, whether it's a financial institution, it's a bank, a retailer, it doesn't matter. If people want to interact with your company and the marketing that you're doing because it hits home harder and better, then it's going to be hard for those companies to not see that the bottom line's going to be improved by this effort. So I would take a very strong testing schedule and plan with what you're trying to do, because to me, it's a lot easier internally to sell a test than to say, okay, we're going to change our entire brand identity and we're going to now go to market around a totally different thing than we've ever done. But if you do small tests in your media plan or with your messaging, with your content strategy, you're telling more effective stories, I think you will put one step in front of the other and start working down that path.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
I know her.
I know. Yeah, shout out to Andy. He's the best. We work together. So, as a partner of a trans individual and part of the LGBTQ community myself, and as a marketer, I feel often that people in the workplace kind of come to me and say, like, what's your perspective on XYZ LGBTQ, you know, thing? And that's a big burden, I feel like you're representing the LGBTQ community at work, which could actually sway different things. And I just wonder, like, if any of you have any suggestions on the best way to handle that and not being just feeling so like bombarded with like, wow, maybe I'm the only like LGBTQ person on this team at work, and they're asking me like, how do we make sure the LGBTQ community is represented in our work? What's the best way to drive them in the right direction?
I have a couple of ideas. I know that's a shock. One is get them to hire more LGBTQ people, right? Right, like, again, I'm going to go back to that part of if you market to me and I find out that your company has bad policy and doesn't have any of the community working, like, nope, right? That's one. I think two, and this is a big ask, and so I know that, but like until there are more folks, we have to do it. We have to do it, and we also have to stay in touch with the communities. We also need to own that we're speaking from our perspective, and we also need to get more people who are paid. Like, I had the good fortune to be the education coordinator for the Gender and Sexuality Center at UT, and so I got paid to be the voice of my people for 7 years. But I also gave 100 workshops a year, and I didn't get paid very much. So I think we need community experts working within organizations, so it isn't just Aunt Sue, who's a lesbian, who's getting asked all the questions, right? God bless Aunt Sue.
I think one perspective I have on that, and you mentioned it as a mirror, and until there's more representation, I think we have to be strong enough and brave enough to be that mirror for our organization. When I couldn't find a job in 2008 and 9 when I was finishing undergrad, and I was told by someone that I very respect that, well, if you change your voice in interviews, you may have a better chance at getting a job. And I immediately responded, well, I do not want to work for somewhere where I feel like I have to change my voice. And I think from that moment on, I knew that I did want to be a mirror, an active mirror for gay men in the workplace or just the broader queer community in general, and that I have fought to be on lists like Forbes so that I can show that we are powerful business people in our own right. It doesn't matter that we're queer. We bring value to the organization and we can drive the business. And so I think you just have to kind of take that internally and say, I can do it.
Yeah. I actually hold a little bit of a different perspective than y'all, just because like I've been stuck in quite a few like really uncomfortable conversations with people about like queerness and like sexuality at work that I did not want to be in.
Yeah, that's true.
And so like there's an organization here by the name of TENT, which is the Transgender Education Network of Texas, and there's a lot of like really awesome resources about like just explaining some of the basic type things, and sometimes I'm just like, check this website out. I'm not your educator. Like, just check this out. And like, I think it's important. And sometimes when I'm in conversations with this with folks, I'll end up using like the Socratic method of saying like, what do you think the queer community is? And then they're like, well, I don't know. I'm like, well, then go find out. And I mean, because I think that, I also want to be like an ambassador for queerness, and I want to be like out and proud and that sort of thing. But I also know that like, my job doesn't necessarily have to do directly with my queerness, and so sometimes it's just a matter of just saying like, love you, but go educate yourself.
Yeah, truth. Yep.
Hi, I'm Nellie, and I work in marketing for HarperCollins Children's Publishing. So unlike a lot of people here, I'm not marketing a brand. I'm doing individual books for kids from 0 to 18. The great thing is that more and more we are acquiring books that address everything you guys are talking about. I'm proud of that.
Yes.
But the harder thing is marketing them, because we have a couple of barriers. I have the parents, the librarians, and the kids themselves. And I would just love perspective on what you would have wanted what as parents you'd want to see, what as when you were a kid you would want to see, because very often we are marketing the buckets of girl and boy, and by the way, it's like boy up until age 12 when they stop reading altogether, and then we're just marketing to girls, and we have all these teen titles. You know, we have Simon versus the Homo sapien Agenda, which is now a movie that's coming out, but we're pushing it all to girls. So I would just love you guys to talk a little bit about kids, if you would.
I think it's great. So thank you, right? Like, again, as somebody who's been out a long time, you know, there were like 5 books and there were no children's books. And I think for me, like just normalizing that there are different ways of being boys and girls, like just even on that simple a level, right? That it doesn't necessarily need to be a trans story, but that like often in bathrooms, little children ask me why I'm there and who I am and what is happening, right? And if I ever get to answer, like have that conversation, what I always say to them is, what would it mean? Because they think I'm a boy in their bathroom and they're worried. And I just, after a little bit of chit chat and talking about Judith Butler and the deconstruction of gender,
I love you, Shane.
I just tell them that I'm a different type of girl. And they're like, cool, can I have a cookie, mom, right? Yeah. But I think just kind of, and I hate this term, but I'm going to use it in this sentence. I hate like the normalizing in books, because I also think like gender roles and gender expectations are so strong that you have to play with certain toys, and you have to wear certain clothes and all of these things, that if we can just start like undoing expectations about masculinity and femininity with young children without necessarily making it about identity politics. Like for me, if that would have happened, if my mom could have seen a book where I existed in it so she didn't have to tell me I couldn't exist, like that would have been amazing.
Yeah. I love that you're here, by the way. On the plane here, I told some of my friends about this. I wrote a children's book without any, yeah, let's chat. Let's chat after this. And for me, what I thought about when literally 2 days ago when I wrote this was how do we just help any child assess their feelings that they're having, and that you can be brave and excited and scared all at the same time. And it's not so much about gender, it's
and
just
fabulous.
about and fabulous, of course. It's more about taking control of your feelings and taking ownership of them and speaking openly about that. And I think that message resonates with little girls, it resonates with little boys. Everybody should feel that way.
Yeah, and I guess to just like put a finer point on it, I'm super blessed that like my parents were really into treating me like a tiny adult rather than like a kid, and I think that to me was like a really big thing. And what's weird about it is like when I came out, then the talk started going into like it's just a phase or you're just going to change your mind. So like it was weird to me that like that was very like positive messaging up until like I came out. But I think it's important to just like remember that especially in marketing kids books is saying like if you're feeling like that, A, it's okay, and B, it's okay to be who you are. Like, it's not something that somebody is gonna go like change their, like, it shouldn't be something that somebody tries to change your mind about, and then they're like, no, you're not like that. Right. Because I think that's a lot of the messaging that a lot of queer kids get, is that like, you're not like that, you're like this, you're just a kid.
Right.
Last question?
Yes.
Hi. So best case scenario, society keeps moving forward in gender equality and acceptance for every single person. Where do you see society being in 10 years in continuing this motion of everyone, including,
I just want to be really clear that I am not trying to dismantle the gender binary. I'm trying to make room for people outside of it. I think a lot of times people are like, Shane, you're trying to get rid of gender. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to expand it. So I think, in Shane's world, we will all introduce ourselves with our name and our pronouns. Hi, I'm Shane, Z, her, hers. And the person would be like, I'm Susan, she, her, hers. And we wouldn't, like, that would just be part of the way we introduced ourselves to each other, that we would just have clothing departments, that we wouldn't have men's and women's clothing departments, that you would just go in and pick beautiful clothes that you liked and that fit, and that we would think about maybe making men's pants a little broader through the hips and thighs, right? And that we wouldn't look at babies and say, is that a boy or a girl? We would say, hey, is your baby healthy? How are you doing with potty training? And we would stop putting ridiculous bows on bald babies' heads, right? So I think it's like just taking gender and just expanding it and taking all expectations out of it.
Yeah. I mean, from a marketing and advertising perspective as well, I would love to see more than one Super Bowl ad that has gender neutral pronouns, gender inclusive pronouns represented. That is such an easy thing. In 10 years, it should not take 10 years for us to be able to do that as brands. I would love to see media partners, and this is something every one of us in this room, if you work at an agency, if you work at a brand, we can go back and push on our partners to deliver the types of technology and platforms that we want to be able to effectively talk to our audiences. And Shane, to echo, it's cisgender is on the spectrum, right? It is a spectrum. So by being more inclusive with our messaging, you're not excluding cisgender audiences. And so I think within 10 years, I absolutely think we can do it.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I also think in terms of design, I mean, so in the design community, there's a lot of people that are held as like, you know, these big like luminaries of design, like Eames or Steve Jobs, and a lot of them are people that I'm like, wow, these are all like cisgender white dudes, right? And so what I would like to see in the field of design is like Fast Company articles about gender non-binary designers just killing it, right? Or groups, and it's already starting to come to fruition with Hexagon, which is a group for gender non-binary and women folks to get together and like talk about UX and talk about user experience and support one another. So like it's already happening, but like more mentorship in that. And then I just want to sort of like, especially in terms of like design patterns, I'd like to see more things happening on like a sliding scale and more companies considering and designing for people of varying socioeconomic backgrounds, because especially in the gender non-binary community, there's a huge pay gap between like, you know, and currently we're focusing on like the highest strata of people, saying like, we're just going to market to this other tech industry, and like, yeah, people with feature phones, I don't know where they fit in, but here's this new smartphone app, right? As designers, we need to be considering not just the digital sphere, but like the sphere in which we all inhabit, which is the world.
I know that we're coming to a close, but one thing that I personally want to say as well is just thank you for the time and the education too. Me personally coming into this has been an experience, and I think we all walk away as friends here today.
Yeah.
But I think something that you all told me last night over dinner was the idea of do not live in fear of trying, and that do it with care was the key takeaway. So don't worry about being perfect, just worry about trying to do something and to take steps forward. So appreciate you all today, and I appreciate everyone in this room. We've got pins here for free if you'd like to take them and wear them. My pronouns are. It's a great question to start with folks here. So come on up, and thanks for coming.